It's time now for the award-winning #1 local talk show in Northeast Pennsylvania, The Sam Lesante Show. Now here's your host, Sam Lesante.
Welcome to the Sam Lesante Show. Remember, folks, if you're watching us in Hazleton, Service Electric Cable Vision, we're on HD channel 513. 2 channels now, and of course, Comcast 190 in Pottsville, 92 in Mountaintop, 190 in the Scranton area, and of course, WTVE when we're doing broadcast in the Philadelphia area. My guest today, folks, no stranger to the greater Hazleton area. In fact, no stranger to a lot of people in the country. You know him as our chief of police here in Hazleton, Jerry Speziale. But today I wanted to bring Jerry on because he's a unique person. I don't want to say character because he'll put me in jail. He's a unique person. And you, Jerry, first of all, thanks for coming. I know you're a busy guy. Remember us, I know we're poor, but
always do, Sam.
You got to lower yourself and come and see.
I always do, Sam.
But I know you find time for us, and we appreciate that. But you really are swamped. Jerry, your past, okay, involvement in different things. I mean, I Googled you, and I was always impressed of your background. But God, I mean, you have such a enormous. Take me back. Why you wanted to be a cop to begin with.
I was a young boy, and my mother's brother, Anthony Padula, was the superintendent, Thomas Constantine, from New York State Police executive assistant. He was a trooper who went through the ranks of the New York State Police. And what ended up happening is he was the first original undercover that worked during the Woodstock motorcycle gang days, the big afro, the chain. And I can remember as a young boy, him coming to family functions, pulling in with his partner with an old Cadillac Eldorado, getting out with the afro, the peace sign, the gun, just the whole thing. And that kind of inspired me as a young boy to get involved in law enforcement. So I watched him throughout the years. He did very, very well. How old
were you then?
I was probably, between 10 to 12 years old at that time. I was a young boy. Yeah. And I was watching this as I grew up, watched him move through the ranks of the state police and, become a successful undercover. That's where I learned about undercover work. Mm-hmm. He's alive today. He's in South Florida, still working. He went from the state police, retired, ended up going to handle Medicare fraud for the state of Florida, then became the chief of investigations for the state attorney over in Collier County, and now is actually still running for the Social Security Administration as a supervisor in his early 80s.
Now, you were born in New Jersey.
I was born in New Jersey, in Paterson.
Okay, Italian family.
Yes.
Okay, Italian on both sides?
Yes.
So you're full-blooded Italian?
Yes.
Okay, so now you're in New Jersey, okay, Italian family. Interesting because, I'm full-blooded Italian, sure. And we moved to Partysville. So now you're in high school, and you still want to go the direction, okay? You see a lot, in your life, all right? Mm-hmm. So you go to, did you come right into the police work right after?
No, what I did is, as a young kid, my first car was a wrecker, was a tow truck. So I started towing for the New Jersey State Police on the interstate and was out there late at night with car rollovers and arrests and impounds. So like I said, I had this inspiration from my family to become a police officer. My father at the time, the late Red Murphy or Anthony Murphy, was the Republican chairman at the time in Passaic County. And him and my dad grew up together. Red was, obviously the political force in Passaic County at that time. And I had taken the test to become a Passaic County Sheriff's Officer, which eventually I became the sheriff. I went on, and I was there for about a few months. And what ends up happening is I had applied for Miami, Los Angeles, New York, Houston. At that time in 1980, everybody was looking for mass hirings for police officers. So I took the tests around the country. And the first one that actually had called me was the NYPD. And my family had already helped me with my job in Passaic County as a sheriff's officer.
What year was this?
That was in 1981.
Okay. Didn't your parents be concerned about their son going in?
Oh my God. Sam, you have no idea what I went through. I was told, you can't do it. You're putting your life on the line going to the South Bronx or somewhere in New York. You know nobody there. You know, you have a beautiful job here in the sheriff's department. It was something I did on my own. I wanted to do it on my own. So I remember going to work one morning. I was told that at the time that, you know, everybody tried to convince me otherwise and told me that I, you know, couldn't do it. And what ends up happening is I got dressed one morning for the Passaic County Sheriff's Department. I came down the stairs in that uniform, and I drove over the George Washington Bridge, and I raised my hand, and I was sworn in as a New York City police officer.
What kind of experience was that, being a New York City police officer, which, believe me, as even to today, I have the greatest respect for?
In the early 80s, I mean, I was assigned to the South Bronx, and I was involved in a shooting the first day out of the academy. Then I was shot 3 years later in 1986. I was ambushed, I was hit, and my partner was hit. A female officer was hit twice in the chest. A woman was killed. I ended up, unfortunately, having to take the life of that individual that took the woman and shot at us. So it was, you know, it was a very, very crazy time in the 80s. Crack had just hit, and it was just completely out of control. The Bronx was on fire. So, I mean, it was just, but...
Were there a lot of Italians in the police department with you?
You know, the New York City Police Department is a very diverse police department, but in the early 80s, at that time, it was Irish, Italian, mostly. You know, there were, you know, that was the dominating groups. I think it was mostly Irish and Italian that had become part of the New York City.
How long did you stay on the force?
I sat in the force for 15 years.
New York City Police.
New York City Police Department, moved through the ranks.
Okay, now your family and I bring this up, you know where I'm going here, okay? You know, you watch the movies today, you know, in fact, we're going to talk about your movie a little later on, but you're talking about, you know, unfortunately, sometimes there are bad elements in, you know, in both Irish, Italian, or whatever, but let's stick with the Italians. There had to be some elements there where your parents certainly were not proud of. I know my grandparents were not proud of some of the people that were bad elements, okay? Now, you are a cop in New York City, okay? Any cousins down the road want to come to you and say, look, you got to help me out, blah, blah, bing, blah, blah, boom, that kind of stuff?
No, nothing like that.
You
You know,
twist
I
your
was
arm?
actually put in the Organized Crime Control Bureau.
Wow.
But when I was put in the Organized Crime Control Bureau, I wanted to work on the drug cartels. I lost a cousin to a heroin overdose, my mother's sister's son. And I watched the devastation to the family. And I really felt that I could make a difference. And what happened was, when I was shot in that shootout, I remember Mayor Koch at the time coming to my bedside. My wife was pregnant for our first child at the time. And I remember them saying they're sending the state police to notify my family. And you know, you're hit with morphine, you're just been involved in a shooting. It was, you know, chaotic. And I remember saying to them, please push me to a phone. Nobody is going to talk to my family, but they're going to hear my voice. I want them to hear my voice, to know that I'm alive, to know that I'm okay, before some state trooper goes and knocks on the door and the first words out of his mouth is, your son has been shot. And I didn't want that. So they did do that. And then I remember them walking around the bed, assessing my uniform damage. I mean, I'm sorry about that. I remember them walking around the table and assessing my uniform damage in the hospital. You know, get him a new jacket, get him a new pair of pants. I wanted to say, hey, buddy, do you realize I got a bullet? You know, so that was my experience. And I remember then the police commissioner being there and, you know, all the chiefs. And I remember that magical question that changed my career for life. The police commissioner said, kid, what do you want to do with your career? Now, somebody else could have said, I want to work in headquarters, I want to be promoted, I want to be a detective. My answer was exactly what my uncle was. I want to be an undercover narc. Sam, it was like trading a winning lottery ticket for a postage stamp.
Yeah.
They looked at me like, you want to be an undercover narcotics in the city of New York? Yes, that's what I want to do.
So then you moved into that.
Well, what happens is I recovered from my injuries. And after recovering from my injuries, I came back to work. And we had the big old desks and the telephone message book, and stand in that lineup, and I hear, Speziale, here? You've been transferred. Been transferred to Bronx Narcotics. You're an undercover.
What was that like, Jerry?
Well, you go through training. I would get dressed in a Salvation Army box in the morning. They would put track marks on me with makeup artists. You know, I had long hair with cornrows in it. Remember, I was working in Harlem and the Bronx as an Italian kid. So I had to, lay in the bus stop and put grease all over me. I used to use carbon paper to rub all over me. Wear these, one shoe and one shoe on. You had to act like, I had to go into crack dens and into drug dens.
Wow.
And then my job was to go in, make the purchase, take a picture in my mind of where everything was, the guns, the drugs, who was in there. And then I would come out and then I would report that to the field team. And then they would let others go in so they wouldn't burn me. And then they would go in and take out the location. I did that until I was promoted in 1989, and I was promoted and I was put into the United States Drug Enforcement Administration Task Force.
When you were doing that, then you had to go home, right? I mean, or did you stay in the streets?
No, I was, well, you worked.
Yeah.
18, 20-hour days.
Oh.
You
And
know,
then you
you were
clean
in
up
the
and-
streets,
yeah.
clean up, and you come back.
Jerry,
know.
do you think, I know this may be a dumb question, but do you think it really made a difference when you went in and you were undercover and they arrested these people that were pushing drugs? What happens is they leave and then another group comes in. You do that, you leave, another group. Does it ever say, is it all worth it? Is it?
Well, that's where I wanted to go to that next level. And when I got to the United States Drug Enforcement Task Force, that's when I became a pilot and a boat captain and opened up import-export companies in South America and got into the cartel and infiltrated them and started taking down the source from South America and Central America, taking down big cartel members in Switzerland and other places where we would lure them and then take them out. So I felt that as we, moved into that next level of things that have never been done in the United States, where I've seized hundreds of tons of cocaine and taken down, thousands of major players in these criminal organizations, that was, something where you felt you were making a difference.
Fear of what you were. I mean, they could have
Killed you in a minute. They killed many.
Oh yeah.
Many were killed. I lost, a dear friend that grew up around the corner from me, was killed. It's something that you don't really think about. If you let your fear overcome you, that's something you can't. And that's in your training and your instincts. That just, you either have it or you don't. And that's what happens.
Yeah. I'm talking to Jerry Speziale, folks. He's the police chief of Hazleton. He has a fascinating story, and I thought maybe it'd be a good opportunity for a Sam and Jerry talk. Now, there's a couple movies that he's involved with. Now, a TV series coming up. I mean, what's he doing in Hazleton? I mean, when Jack Palance was my friend, we were out in California. We had a great time. And Jerry Speziale is here in Hazleton. And guess what, folks? Crime is going down. Isn't that a good thing? We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the Sam Lesante Show. Remember, 24/7 SSPTV.com. My email, sam@ssptv.com. My guest today is Jerry Speziale, folks. He is the police chief in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. But we're talking about his life so far. So you're undercover agent, brought down big guys. Okay, now you also, your career here. How did you, then what happened that you went back to, were you the county sheriff before you went into narco, or how did you?
No, after. What happens is I retire from the NYPD in 1997. And then I eventually become the county sheriff. I run and I do 3 terms. I had an 82% approval rating. And at that time, I was appointed by Governor Christie's administration to the Port Authority as the Deputy Superintendent of Police, where I served 4 years. I did that, and from there I ended up going down to the Mobile metro area. It was the 6th most violent city within Alabama and almost within the nation. There was such violence. So what ended up happening was there happened to be a DEA agent that was on this blue ribbon committee, and I get a call from him. You know, they're looking for somebody to make change down here. Would you be interested? At that time, I decided to take the challenge on. So I went down, and I was going to make that transition. And at that time, you know, my wife was sick at the time, and she had passed away. In between that transition, she, you know, digressed. And at that point, my children, I had to come home. That plan just did not work out. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, I ended up coming back and became the police commissioner in the city of Patterson, where I was born.
Now, were you ever threatened?
Yeah, my life was threatened. I got called in the middle of the night. The person that the book is written about, what happened was I got called by a lawyer in the middle of the night, and I was told that there was an inmate in a cell with someone that I had worked against, and that this individual was doing a death plot on my family. So I lived for a while with armed guards in my home, law enforcement that were there 24 hours, 7 days a week. That was very difficult for my children, for me, taking people to school, your family. You know, that's hard. Imagine somebody living in your house with machine guns. You know, that's just a difficult situation. So he had a death threat on my life and on my family's. And at that time, we decided, you know me, Sam, what I did is I went to the U.S. Attorney, I went to the United States Marshals. I met with them, we devised a plan, jumped on a plane. I got on that plane and flew down to Jessup, Georgia. Said we're going to go get the inmate to come out and fake sick. We're going to put a recorder on him. We're going to push him back into the cell. We're going to get it on a recording, and then we'll lock the guy up, and we'll hold him for another 25 years so that he can't hurt nobody. Mm-hmm. Well, what happens is it didn't work out well. So what we did is we got the Brazilian authorities, because the guy was in there for importing 6 tons of cocaine to the United States. So what we did is we had the Brazilian authorities, who don't have a double jeopardy standard. They hit him with the exportation of those 6 tons. And then the U.S. Marshals flew him out to Brazil. He began to start a 25-year to life sentence, and about 2 years ago he broke out of jail.
Oh, wow.
So he's on the loose right now.
Yeah. Still fear from that?
Not at all.
No?
No.
The movie, okay, how were you involved with the very first movie that you were involved with?
You know, I've done a number of things from O'Reilly. Once I wrote my autobiography, Without a Badge, what happened was, you know, you do O'Reilly, you did Lou Dobbs, I did Rita Cosby, I've done a lot of the talk shows.
Sam Lesante.
I did Sam Lesante. I've done a number of...
highlight of your career.
You got it. I've done a lot of talk shows and did it for Court TV as an expert, you know, so I would do a lot of things like that. And then what ends up happening is Antoine Fuqua, who I know personally,
yes,
who's a very good director in Hollywood, calls me up and says, did you ever think about acting? And I remember that day him calling me saying, Jerry, did you ever think about acting? And I said, Antoine, I'm not an actor. I'm a police officer. He says, no, but you were an undercover for all those years and you were able to convince the cartel, so you are an actor. Yeah. I said, yeah, but I make my own lines. So he says, but you can make your own lines in this because we want it to be real. I'm shooting Brooklyn's Finest with John Langley from Cops, who I know as well. Yeah. And he said, would you just come over and give an audition? I said, okay, I'll come over and I'll give an audition. Yeah. So I went over and I tried to read their lines. Yeah. He sent me to acting school.
He did?
He did send me to acting school, so I flubbed it. And then I came back and he said, why don't you tell us what you would really say in these 2 or 3 scenes that I had to work with Richard Gere. I said, I would say it like this, and this is what would really happen in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. So that's the words that came out in that movie were really.
Were you in that movie?
I was in Brooklyn's Finest, yeah. Richard Gere, I was his boss.
Oh, yeah?
So I had 3 scenes. One in the locker room with him.
How'd you like Hollywood? I mean, how'd you like acting?
It's you don't realize what goes into it.
I know.
Sitting on a table
Yeah.
with 5 different angles of
Yeah.
a camera
Yeah.
for 12 hours to get 2 minutes of film, nobody realizes what you go through.
Yeah.
So, having 3 talking
Different takes
parts,
of the same thing
different
over-
takes
oh,
of the
yeah,
same
yeah,
thing from
yeah.
different directions,
Yeah,
and if you're sitting on a table, like I said, you'll sit for 12 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was interesting. It was exciting for the family.
Yeah.
But I'm not a movie star. I'm not an actor. I'm a police officer. That's really where my passion is. And it was something that I had a great opportunity to do.
Well, just quickly, when Jack Palance is back to when we were grown-ups, there was a scene with Henry Fonda, not Henry, but the Fonda.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Okay,
Right?
anyway, 8 hours to do a minute and a half.
Yeah.
It was interesting. But anyway, let's not. So from that, the movie, which was very successful, I'm sure you made a lot of friends there. Okay. Sure. How'd you find Richard Gere?
They found me.
I mean, as a person.
Oh, Richard Gere was a gentleman because I remember the first scene. I'm with Richard Gere and I have to yell at him. I have to yell, "Hey, Dugan," and I have to kind of scold him in the locker room. Mm-hmm. So I go walking into the locker room and I remember looking at Richard Gere and panicking
Yeah.
because it's Richard Gere.
Yeah.
And I say, "Hey, Dugan," and my voice is like really.
Yeah.
And he turns around and screams my lines back at me.
Yeah.
"Hey, Dugan," and really loud. And I go, "Got it." So, you live and learn. Richard Gere was a gentleman.
Yeah, you
Very
find
nice
them, they're very nice. I was very fortunate to
very,
meet a lot of
very,
people
very
with
nice
Jack. So now we have Hazleton Police Chief's story to be made into a movie,
Yes.
okay?
It's going to be made into a TV series.
Okay, so what's the story here? What's that?
The story is about they bought my life rights. I'm the consultant. What happens is I signed a contract with David Permit from Permit Presentations, Ryan Reynolds, Dark Trick Films, Jonathan from that. I also have Matt Krushik, who's the writer, and also with NBC Universal Cable. What will happen is the reason it's with NBC Universal Cable is because if you sign with one specific network, then you can only go with that network. So this could go to any network. It could go to your network. It could go to Netflix. It could go to, anywhere where they want to produce this television show.
Producing?
They're going out now. They just, finalized the deal with us. So we all received, our first payments. Now they'll start to write the pilot, and then they'll go and figure the network that this will air on.
Talking to Jerry Speziale, folks. TV star, movie star, chief of police, you name it. Come back, we'll talk a little bit about this movie and the TV series and where we're going and what's happening in Hazleton a little bit as far as what he's done as the chief. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Sam Lesante Show for my guest, Jerry Speziale. Folks, actor, movie star, writer, chief of police, you name it. Well, anyway, your TV series, when do you think it'll be hitting whomever?
I'm sure it'll come out in the Hollywood Reporter and Variety. David Permit, the producer who's believed in this project from the first day I met him 10 years ago. He told me 10 years ago it would take 10 years to the date, and I thought he was crazy.
And it is, it happened.
And that's what it takes.
So now you're our chief of police in Hazleton. Give me quickly have you done any work instead of signing autographs? Have you done something, Jerry? Come on.
I want to say that the men and women have been tireless in their efforts. They've been aggressively policing this city, and the numbers show it for the first couple months. Mm-hmm. Robberies down 70%. The only crime that is up is burglary. Everything else, if you look at overall crime, I would say it's about 29% down. Mm-hmm. In the last 3 months. Burglaries are up, and that's something that I'll focus on now.
Jerry, you're doing that with a tight staff?
We're doing it with a tight staff.
Could you imagine if you had a couple more cops, what we would be able to accomplish in this town?
If we could just, and that's burglaries. Think about it.
Yeah.
Omnipresence, patrol,
Yeah.
sharing intelligence,
Yep.
investigations. That's how we can get to that point, Sam.
Maybe someday people will think in office, what's good for the town, what's good for them other than this pet stuff that you're doing. But you're doing the right thing, Jerry. I compliment you. You're doing your job as a chief.
And that's it. That's what you hired me to do.
It's always
and
nice
that's what I'll
having
do.
you. It's always
Thank
nice
you,
having
Sam.
you.
It's
Okay.
always great to be
The best
here.
of luck to you
My
and your
pleasure.
family.
Thank you
Okay,
so
Jerry
much.
Speziale, folks. He's the chief of police. Let me tell you something. Just Google. I mean, I know a little bit about him, but when you go and you read all the stuff that he's done and what he's done to help thousands and thousands of people out, it's very impressive. We'll see you next time. Get it?